Hey everyone, welcome to Food Talk Live. Really excited to be here today. I had some dental work yesterday, so if it looks like I'm not smiling when I should be smiling, I'm actually smiling. Um, I want to say that Food Tank has allowed me the opportunity to meet so many of my heroines and heroes who are working to improve the food system all over the world. It's also allowed me to meet some folks who are, I would actually call superheroes, people who have devoted their whole lives to fighting hunger. And today we get to talk to one of those people, even though he's not wearing a cape. Billy Shore really is a superhero in the fight against childhood hunger in the United States. Billy is the founder and executive chair of Share Our Strength, the parent organization for No Kid Hungry, the No Kid Hungry campaign. And since founding Share Our Strength in 1984 with his sister Debbie Shore, Billy has led the organization in raising more than 700 million to fight hunger and poverty, and has won the support of a really diverse group of folks, including business, government officials, health and education experts, and the sports and entertainment industries. He's also the chair of Community Wealth Partners, Share Our Strengths for-profit consulting firm, which provides strategic consulting to help leaders and communities solve social problems. Billy was kind enough to have me on his podcast, Add Passion and Stir. I had such a great time. So I recommend that everyone go ahead and subscribe right now. It's really one of the best podcasts out there. And it's funny, even though I've been a huge fan of Billy's for many years, I never considered having him on the podcast because I'm intimidated by him. And I've had Congress folks on this podcast. I've had, government officials. I've had leaders of corporations. But Billy Shore, because he is a superhero, is someone who I was a little bit fearful of having on here. So I'm glad I overcame that fear, Billy, and so happy to see you and have you with us today.
Thanks. And now you know how unintimidating I am, because when you and I talked on Add Passion and Stir, it was like we'd known each other for, I don't know, 15 years. And of course, I've known your work for, quite a long time. So thanks for having me on. Real privilege.
Thank you so much. So, Billy, I like to start off by asking people their favorite food memory. And I know you probably have a bunch of them.
Oh, I guess it would have to be Thanksgiving dinners at our house. And that's probably something that a lot of people say, but it's always been such a special moment, such a celebration of food and family, and such a closeness. And particularly as a young child, we didn't have a large family, and we didn't have a lot of large family events except that one time a year. So it really stands out.
That's great. That's wonderful. So tell me how all of this started for you. How did you become involved in sort of, you didn't start off being a superhero, you started off doing other things. How did you get involved in the fight against childhood hunger?
Well, I'd worked in government and politics quite a long time ago, Danny. I'd worked in the U.S. Senate for two senators, Bob Kerrey from Nebraska and Gary Hart from Colorado. They ran for president three times between them,
Right.
unsuccessfully. Learned a ton, and also learned some kind of community organizing skills and some political organizing skills. And I always had a passion for making a difference. But as you know, the political system has its pros and cons. It's vitally important that we, be fully engaged in our politics. But
Right.
I also had an impulse that our politics were leaving a lot of people out. I guess that's the best way to say it. Is I'd met so many talented people in politics, but I knew as many or more were outside looking in, and that if we could create
Right.
a vehicle, a way for them to, in our case, literally share their strength to get involved in the community to make a difference, our bet was that people would respond to that, and turned out that they did.
And why did you and Debbie decide to start this? What facilitated it?
Yeah, the catalyst at the time, I'd always been interested in the issue of hunger because it always seemed to me to be so out of sync with uh, just America's values, its
Right.
resources, its culture. It just seemed to be inexcusable and unacceptable, and just no reason for it. So it was something I'd always cared about. And then back in 1984, just at a time that I had finished doing some political work and government work, the Ethiopian famine came along, and that was a huge humanitarian disaster. And Share Our Strength was one of the responses to it. We just felt that particularly the food community, the
Right.
culinary community, people who had made their livelihoods from feeding people, would respond to the notion that they could make a difference, and they really did.
They really, really did. And yeah, I think a lot of people, the Ethiopian famine was sort of a catalyst to, that we hadn't conquered famine like we had conquered so many communicable diseases and other things. Famine was still with us after so many years. So much of the work that you do revolves around children. And you released a new report called "The Longest Summer: Childhood Hunger in the Wake of the Coronavirus." And childhood hunger during the summers is often, Food Tank every summer writes a story about it because kids are not in school and, they're not getting their school meal programs. This year has been especially difficult because kids have been out of school since March in a lot of cases with school closures, and school districts and some superheroes of a different kind and local communities all across the United States have really stepped up to the plate to make sure that kids have been fed and their communities and their families have been fed. Can you talk about some of the major findings from the report?
Yeah, one of the things we found, not surprisingly, is that there was a huge spike in the number of kids who needed food assistance, and that there were times during this pandemic where almost half of American families, 47%, said they were dealing with or experiencing hunger in some way, and that's really, quite unprecedented.
Yeah.
What's been shocking about this is that you know, we made 10 years of progress. The No Kid Hungry campaign, and not just the No Kid Hungry campaign, but the work of the broader anti-hunger community has had a huge impact over the last 10 years and really reducing childhood hunger. We've still got quite a bit of unacceptable poverty in the United States. We've still got food insecurity. But before this pandemic, if you'd asked me how many kids were hungry on a chronic basis, how many kids were actually missing meals, I would say that we had driven that number to a very low and manageable number, and that we were going to
Hmm.
ultimately succeed in ending childhood hunger. Now that 10 years of progress, of course, has been washed away. The hub for doing a lot of that work that kids needed, the support that they needed, was the school system. It's the one thing that almost all kids have in common, is that they go to school, and so we know where to reach them and how to reach them. We added millions of kids to the school breakfast program and
Right.
helped set up tens of thousands of summer meal sites. So when the schools closed, all of a sudden you had 22 million kids who depended on school for breakfast and lunch, in many cases also for an after school snack or supper at home without anything. And so we had to work with all of the schools to find ways to supplement, create alternatives to school feeding. In many cases, it was grab and go meals set up in tents outside of the schools. Sometimes it was working with nonprofit partners, whether it was Boys and Girls Clubs or YMCA's. It was really a phenomenal response. It's so important, I think, for people to understand, and sometimes this gets overlooked. Our school meals programs are 100% federally funded. So
Right.
there's tremendous leverage. If we can find ways to connect kids to those meals, the meals themselves are paid for. So what our dollars need to go for is transportation and refrigeration and serving the meals, and now protective personal equipment. But when you do that, $1 can unlock many, many dollars of meals. So that's been our focus. The image, Denny, that I've always had in mind is, from the movie and the World War II history of Dunkirk, when, thousands of ships went to Dunkirk to rescue the
Right.
British fleet. That's kind of what this was like. Americans just from all over the country, and particularly those connected to the school system, found ways to make up for these lost meals. So we
Yeah.
still have a long way to go. At the time we started, we knew it was going to blend into summer. Now we're learning that it's going to blend into this school year. So many school systems already have announced that they're not opening, whether it's Chicago or Fairfax County, Virginia, or LA. I mean, over and over and over again. So we're going to have to find ways to keep doing this.
Absolutely. You mentioned, I want to reiterate the statistic you mentioned. You said about 47%, almost half of American families are experiencing hunger. That's incredible. I
Yeah,
mean,
it's
I
really
just
it's
think
really a
that yeah.
Yeah, it's a stunning number. We haven't seen anything like that. And I don't mean to suggest that, half of all Americans are hungry at this moment. People move in and out of hunger and this problem as situations change. And of course, the pandemic has created an endless flow of changing developments. But for that number of Americans to have experienced it at all at any point. It's really
Right.
stunning compared to what pre-pandemic we would have said, 1 in 7 kids maybe. So now we're talking about, maybe 15%, 16% or something like that. We're experiencing hunger. So to go from that to half the families is it's a pretty big leap.
Absolutely. And I imagine people are doing things like skipping meals, they're stretching meals further. What are some other coping mechanisms that they're taking on?
They are. Well, one of the things that you see over and over again is many adults protect their children, and so they make sure that the kids don't skip meals, even if they, as their parents or caregivers, have to cut corners. But the other thing we've all seen, and I just saw it on CBS News again last evening, the North Dallas Food Bank, the North Texas Food Bank in Dallas, lines miles long of families, including many. Here's just one other statistic. 40% of Americans who are availing themselves of the resources of food banks and soup pantries, for 40% of them, it's the first time that they've ever had to do
Right.
this. So, their jobs have gone away, their kids' schools have gone away, their safety net and their cushion has gone away, and so you end up in a line miles long of cars at an emergency food assistance
Yeah.
center. It's something that you know even as shocking as it is, I guess the one positive thing to say about this is, and this is important, is this is a solvable problem. There's parts of this pandemic that you and I, as much as we would want to, probably couldn't impact. We can't make the vaccine come
Sure.
faster. We can't manufacture more personal protective gear. We can't perhaps control how many tests there are available for the virus. But when it comes to food in the United States, we know that we not only have the food, we have it in abundance, and we have food programs. We have school lunch and school breakfast and the SNAP program, which is so important right now that Congress act to extend and
Right.
expand SNAP benefits for families. That's the you were probably going to ask this next, so I'll just jump to it.
Please.
Uh, that's probably the single best thing that we could do is exert some pressure on our elected officials to expand and extend the SNAP program for families who need it right now, because that way they can make the choices that are best for themselves. They can choose healthy foods. They can go to the grocery store, as any of us would want to make the best choices for our family.
Absolutely. And Billy, you worked for a long time in government. You know the ins and outs of how Congress works. Can you explain to me, because this is something that constantly frustrates me? I do not know why SNAP has become such a partisan issue. It seems like something that both sides of the aisle should rally around, support as much as possible because it actually helps American families.
Yeah, well, you've asked a great question, Danny, because for many years, particularly in its origins, SNAP was a bipartisan issue. Our school meals came about, just to mention one kind of related segment, came about when Senators McGovern and Dole, a very, you know, uh, powerful Democrat and a very powerful Republican,
Right.
came together to say we could agree that we've got to make sure Americans are fed. SNAP got kind of caught up in culture wars, more than 20 years ago, and so there was a time where there was probably more fraud and waste and abuse in the system than there should have been. That's been completely eliminated. SNAP is probably one of the most well-run, efficient, and effective government programs there is, but there are still people that use it as a kind of a culture war armament to attack the other side, to say that you're not doing enough to make sure that Americans have jobs, or that their work ethic is strong enough, or that they're making the best choices for their families. It's really a shame because most Americans agree. Certainly, when you leave the politicians out of this, the polling numbers are very strong that most Americans believe we should be feeding our kids and our families, and SNAP's an effective way to do it.
Absolutely, especially during a time of crisis. I mean, I think, COVID has really shown how overnight, almost literally, things can change for families. So many families were out of work because they had restaurant jobs or jobs that were, closed down. And when things can change that quickly, we need these benefits that are afforded to us as Americans to really work for us. and they haven't been.
No, I think that's exactly right. And nobody wants to line up at a food bank. Nobody wants to apply for SNAP. That's not a good feeling. Uh, we've looked at a lot of data that suggests, certainly pre-COVID, that most Americans who have been on SNAP are really only on SNAP for a short time. So it's
Right.
serving its intended purpose of being a bridge to help families get to a place where they're able to support themselves. So hopefully our leadership at some point will come together. Unfortunately, it's like, what you've said is not just true of SNAP now, it's true of almost every issue, which is one
Right.
side proposes and the other side automatically reflexively opposes the issue. And we've just got to find some common ground.
Absolutely. Common ground is definitely needed. And I know the culture wars started 20 years ago, but they're still going on. And I think what's come out of that is a lot of movement on the other side, where you have activists and advocates like yourself who are really striving to break those stereotypes. One thing that I've been so inspired about over the last several months is the BLM movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, the real strides that we're making in equality and social justice. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how Black and Latinx communities are disproportionately impacted by hunger, while at the same time, those communities are also doing a lot to change, what's happening. They're figuring out different ways of feeding their own communities.
Yeah, so communities of color are disproportionately impacted. Rural communities, which are not always communities of color,
Right.
but I think present equity issues in different ways, are also impacted because they're harder to serve. One of the things that, to me, this pandemic has suggested, and that goes to kind of the heart of your question, is how do we not just feed people who need to be fed, but how do we make some of the structural changes in our economy and in our society so that families aren't in the position of needing emergency food assistance in the first place, or supplemental food assistance in the first place, whether it's SNAP or school meals. And one of the things that always strikes me, and you and I think of food as this kind of great unifier, and it is in many ways. It's one of the things that really brings people together. But one of the things we have found is people really come together around the issue of uh, let's make sure we fed our kids. Kids have a certain sympathetic quality, or they bring out an empathetic quality in people. But in many cases, the best thing that we can do for kids is to make sure that we're helping their families and supporting their mom and dad or their caregivers or whoever they're living with, and strengthening their families. And the politics around that break down pretty quickly. So one of the things that I'm excited about in terms of the Black Lives Matter movement, the belief that we have to build equity into every aspect of our work, is that it will help people understand that there are connections to issues. You can't want to feed a hungry child but not be in favor of their parents having a living wage, right? You can't want to feed a hungry child and not want to make sure that their family has decent housing, so that they can find good jobs. We have to help people understand the connections between these issues if we're serious about addressing equity and the root causes of why kids are hungry in the first place.
That's an excellent point. I mean, I think that's the point. We have to make sure that these issues are connected. They're not separate from one another at all. And I think that's you're right on point there. I know we only have a few minutes left, so I want to make sure that people know how to find out more information. They can go to nokidhungry.org. To find the report that I mentioned earlier, they can go to nokidhungry.org/longest summer. Any other websites you want to give out, Billy?
Foodtank.com, just because that's just as important as our work, if not more. So, but no, nokidhungry.org and Food Tank, two organizations trying to address these issues. And I think it's, in terms of what we were just talking about, Danny, I think it's really incumbent on a whole generation of leaders. And I think of your generation as the generation kind of really coming into power now to help people see these connections. It's so tempting to say, send money so that we can feed this hungry child. But we have a responsibility to help people understand why kids are hungry and what they need to do about it and how our political and cultural views need to change. So, as you know, I'm just as big a fan of everything that you're doing, and I think it's just integrally related to our success. I can't see us succeeding if Food Tank doesn't succeed, and probably vice versa. So, I just want to take the opportunity to say thanks for having me on, and thanks for just the amazing work you're doing. And congrats on the Julia Child Award. Can't think of anything cooler. You deserve it.
Thank you so much, Billy. That's very, very kind. You are an inspiration. I am so proud to know you and so honored. And I hope you'll be on the show again when we have a little bit more time. I also hope folks will join me on our next episode when I'll be talking to Bertrand Weber, the culinary director for the Minneapolis public school systems. Billy, you stay well. The world needs you more now than ever before. Thank you so much for all you
Thanks.
do.
Thanks, Danielle. Bye bye.
Bye.